I'm going to talk about how to scale your business, and it's not going to be only my own experience. I think most people in this room would like to see their numbers go like this. We're all on the lower end now, and we're trying to get to become great businesses. So the idea here is to talk about that, and let me give you a little bit of my background so you can understand where I'm coming from. Because in the end, the views that I'm going to share with you today are not only my own, but it comes with some knowledge from other areas. Actually, 99 Taxis is my 6th digital startup. So before that, I started working with the internet in '95 with Tesla. Then I did Guia SCP, which was the first city guides for Brazil. Then I worked, well, I'm going to speak at Endeavor, but I did Pixit as well, which was a video producing company, Imperdível, which was a daily deals website like Groupon. Didn't work out well. And then Guido and 99 Taxis, to which I'm fully committed now. But I've also spent 4 years as the managing director for Endeavor in Brazil, and then gave me the great opportunity to see a lot of startups scaling, some failing to do so and some doing it really, really well. And because of that job, I've made several trips to the Silicon Valley, and we visited companies like Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, PayPal, Yahoo. And this question of how to scale your startup to business is something that always intrigued me. So I usually ask them to all of the founders of these companies when I had the chance to meet them. So basically, the knowledge I'm going to share with you today is a collective experience of all this. So I'm going to give you 3 easy steps to scale your business. And the first one is to have a great business model. And that seems pretty obvious, because if you have a bad one, it doesn't scale. And there's a lot of books and articles that you can read out there to see what a great business model is, but I just picked a couple of points. Usually you would like to have something that has recurring revenues. So when you start getting a big customer base, revenues keep flowing in. You lock in the customers, and they stay there with you, and they become engaged. It's sustainable, so it's not something like a fad that will go away next year. And eventually it builds barriers to entry. So that's also very important as you start building your business, that it becomes more difficult for competitors to enter your market. And actually, one particular thing here is that barriers to entry are near zero in any business today. So whenever you're pitching your company to somebody, to investors, et cetera, they would say, well, I wouldn't invest in that because there are no barriers to entry. But the truth is there are no barriers to entry in any business. So it's basically up to you to go out there and build them. The second one is funding. Of course, growth needs capital. So you should go get it first. You need capital to build your product. You need it to build your team, your customer base. Things are expensive. So without funding, it's really hard to grow. And then, of course, there's world-class management practices. Like in Brazil and in Latin America in particular, people used to manage their businesses based on intuition. And there are much better ways to do that. And I think we're doing it a lot better nowadays, but measuring everything, using KPIs, having more productive meetings based on data, setting goals, seeking efficiency. So all that is super important to have a great business. So basically, these are the 3 steps to scale your startup. And that should be it, right? Because you're doing everything by the book, and if you do all of this right, then you're done. But actually, it's quite the opposite. If you do exactly that, that's probably where you get. You're going to get nowhere. And the reason is, these steps are really crucial. Of course, they're important. Nobody would argue that all these steps are super important for a healthy company. But the truth is, they're not very healthy for an innovative startup. And these are things that will become increasingly important as you grow. But if you start out trying to implement all of these, it just doesn't work. So I'm going to cover a little bit of that. Having a great business model is something that usually you can figure out later. If you build a loyal customer base that's really passionate about your service and your product, you can build tons of business models around it. So really, that should be the focus of the startup, really getting customers engaged and passionate about your product. Just look at Google and Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, and you'll see what I'm talking about. I mean, these companies went on for years with no revenues, but really building loyal customers. And they were bringing a lot of value to these customers. So they knew that eventually they would be able to get big bucks from advertisers, from paying users, different ways of making money. But as long as you're generating value for millions of people, there's always ways to make money. So that's something that you can figure out later, and that's fine. That's exactly what we're doing at 99 Taxis. So in terms of funding, it's tricky because it's very hard to go after funding, because if you go after funding, you get a lot of no's. A lot of people in this room have tried it, and it's really super hard. And the thing is, if you get some traction first with very little money, then funding will chase you. So my advice there is make it work with very little money, very little capital. Tweak your model to be the less capital intensive you can, and move forward. And get some traction, get some customers, get some users. And if you do that and start getting traction, then funding will basically chase you. And all the funds will start calling you up saying, okay, I've seen what you're doing, can we schedule a chat, etc. And I've seen it work a lot of times. And then in terms of better management practices, of course they're important, but you cannot restrain an innovative startup. So you should do that a little bit later. So the thing is, then, what are the 3 real secrets? And the 3 real secrets actually add up to one thing. It's all about people. It's people, people, and people. And you will hear this about people in any company you go, any size, etc. People will tell you, well, our secret sauce, our most important thing, our competitive advantage is the people we have. But there's very little besides it to tell you how you can achieve that. How can you have great people with your company? So let me give you a little bit of my insights. Good people are not enough. You need exceptional people. Exceptional people do the trick. And there is a very big difference. So if you start hiring people in the early stage of the startup, and you have so-so people, etc., that's going to be a big problem. You really need exceptional people to be able to build out a startup and scale quickly. I like having co-founders, and one of the things I learned is that if you have co-founders, you need to look for people with shared values. They must have sort of exactly the same values as you do. But then if they do have different and complementary perspectives, that's a lot better. Because then when you have a discussion, it's richer, you get more data, you get more input, and you end up making a better decision. But you cannot keep discussing values. So that's something that you really need to be on the same page. Another thing that's really rare, in Brazil particularly, is to have IT companies that have a founder who is a coder as well. And I think that's a huge advantage. I've seen it firsthand with 99 Taxis. I mean, one of our partners coded the whole system by himself with 2 months, very little sleep, and we took it from there. And we see a lot of startups being started by business people, hiring IT people, and that usually doesn't work well. Another thing in terms of how do you get great people to your company. And a lot of people would say, oh, you were lucky you found those guys, etc., and you were very lucky you managed to assemble a great team. And actually, luck has very little to do with it. It's actually hard work and a super high bar. It's very labor intensive to find great people. And usually the best way to find them is through nominations. Because it's super hard to get great people. They're usually employed. They're not looking for jobs. So when you publish your job offer in tens of different sites, you're paying for that, etc., and you get like 200 CVs, and you look at them, and I mean, you call a lot of people for interviews. You've all gone through this, and it's really hard to find great people. So what I've learned is nominations are always the best way, and if you get great people, they'll also attract great people. There's a saying that A people bring A people, and B people bring C people, because they want to look smarter, and they're afraid that if they bring someone that's better than them, they're going to lose space in the company, etc. And actually, the smarter people are not afraid of that, because if they set up a huge team of great people, they'll get promoted, and they'll move on to bigger challenges. So one thing that I used to say to everyone who works at our companies is somebody who cannot be promoted will never be replaced. So if you're not ready to get promoted, if you didn't create a team and train them, et cetera, and put them to the point where they're ready to take over your functions, you're not going anywhere. So that's something that's really important, and then you can still instill that culture in your team. So in essence, what I encourage you to do is to spend a lot of time managing people. So hiring, reviewing performance, firing, changing areas, and that's really up to the entrepreneur. Some people try to delegate that. They hire an HR person to do that, and it really is your job to do that. And it's the most important job any entrepreneur can have when they want to scale their business. If they want to stay where they are with that sort of size that they already have, etc., then it's fine. But if they want to grow 10 times a year or 100% a month, that's the only way to do it. So they have to spend a lot of time doing that, and it really pays off. I mean, I've never seen anybody complaining that, oh, I hired a great person, I really regret it. So that's something that you really should put some effort into. But then again, sometimes you make mistakes, and that's part of life. So the other advice there is to fix them quickly and move on. Don't spend a lot of time, no, this person is going to work, I believe they're going to do better next month, etc., and you keep postponing, and that creates a big issue with the company. So fix mistakes quickly and move on. And the last one in terms of people is when you're looking for people, you should always look at will versus skill. And in my experience and all the other companies that I've talked to, will is a lot more important than skill because great people learn really, really fast. So there could be some exceptions for very technical jobs, and that's fine. But in most jobs, if you get people who are really passionate, hardworking, smart, they'll learn super quickly what they have to do, and they'll move on. And if you hire somebody because they had already some experience in that field, then you might be trapped with an expert that doesn't really help your company. So that's it in terms of people. But then I'd like to share that there's also a little method to the madness. And we all know that in startups, things are quite messy. So one of the things that I think is really important is all startups should have a long-term vision. I mean, you should understand where you're going and what you're trying to accomplish in the long term. It doesn't really mean that you have to spend hours putting some stuff on the wall with the mission, the values, whatever. That could be important too, but that's not what I'm talking about. It's really understanding where you want to be. But it's fine if you don't map out all the way to get there. It's okay. And especially in startups, I mean, sometimes you can plan for each week, and that's fine as well. So it becomes tricky if you're trying to do like a one-year plan for a startup. It'll never work. So it's very good to have a path and a long-term vision, but you should divide the planning into very little steps that are short to accomplish and move on. Another super important thing is to have laser focus. I mean, it's very difficult to find a startup that wasn't focused and grew fast. Any case that you'll get, you'll see people who had one product or one service, and they really nailed it. And they did just that for years and years and years, and that worked really well. And once they became big groups, then they started diversifying. And that's a huge challenge for a startup, because once you start putting your products out there, people start asking you different things. Can you do this? Can you do that? And you do have a temptation to answer to all these questions and to help them with that. But that strays you off the path, and it's really, really hard to get back because you're very constrained for time and money. So it's super important to be very focused. Another thing that I think is crucial is speed. Like, deciding fast can be much better than making the right decision. And the worst thing for a startup is to keep postponing decisions, because things are happening fast, your competitors are moving fast, a lot of stuff is going on, and you have to take things off your plate. You have to make decisions and move on. And of course, if you do that, mistakes are inevitable. But that's okay again. I mean, fix them and move along. Because if you're always in doubt, no, I need more data, I need more opinions, I need more information, etc., you'll get paralyzed, and that kills a startup. Another thing that's super important is to test a lot. I mean, there's a talk here about A/B testing, and I think it's one thing that startups do so much better than big companies. getting a lot of feedback, trying different things, trying different business models, different pricing structures. I think it's super important because then you learn a lot and you don't have to spend like 6 months building a business plan to understand exactly what it is that you need to do, but you start putting your product out there, getting a lot of feedback and adapting quickly. And then at the end, so just to remind you, those 3 steps that I talked about, the business model, the funding, and the management practices, they're really important, so don't get me wrong, but they're not the most important thing in the early stages. And I've seen traditional management techniques kill a lot of great potential startups. So one book that talks a lot about that is The Lean Startup, which I encourage you all to read. So the idea is not that these things are not important, but they don't work well for a startup. There are more important things to handle when you're starting your business. Now that's really it. Thank you. Good luck with your endeavors.